Oh, Monday was a weird day. I mean, my car didn't first start in the morning, it was usual. And then driving up the Gainesville, I couldn't, cars were blocking me from making lane changes. I did that.
Sounds like you had the same day as you.
Have you watched Show the Zoo?
No.
It's interesting. Somebody's been joining on Zoom.
Um, well, usually when I do class, I usually do have in the evening we have people actually join in, but right now I'm pretty much using it to record.
That's what
We just upload it to YouTube after we're done. I'm gonna go see. I thought Sylvia on that one. Really nice. Saturday.
Yeah.
And that's.
Jack, are you still working?
No, I retired a year ago from tech. It's my second retirement.
Well, I knew it would be your second retirement, but I didn't know if you were still,
Yeah, no,
if you were still there part-time.
no, Rose is older than me and it just didn't seem fair for me to continue to go downtown, basically, part-time, so. Nope, all the quits. I missed the classroom.
Yeah.
He thinks he's at that.
Don't miss grading. What'd you teach? I taught project management.
But he has times where. Somebody. His thing just got checked. It's awesome.
All right.
Last class.
Last class.
Like
Like I said, I'll come up with something else.
Science and religion.
Yeah,
I
that.
can do that.
That's the, not that it matters, but I'm all in. Not that I mean,
She'll love that.
any difference at all.
Well, one of my odd ADHD hyperfocuses at the moment is trying to teach myself quantum physics.
Oh, that's a good one.
That's,
Not like
that's a fascinating application.
it is. And I'm really having to dumb it down at the beginning.
Smart movie.
Because
Stay out of the math.
it is way over my head at the moment. Um, in preparation for this class, I'm in some ways about to take a leap of faith. This class, in preparation for it and in our discussions, has kind of got me in another hyper focus in which all these things are kind of started to intersect. And what this class brought was kind of, I think, the belief that Tolkien had that we have lost of the importance of wonder, of awe, of mystery, of losing the myths of old, and just existing in this concrete, real, materialistic, scientific world. And people like Tolkien like Lewis, like the British Romanicist poets, all writing in the age of the Industrial Revolution, the Enlightenment, the kind of the dawn of the modern world with World War I and World War II. There was this, I think, plea to step out and to step back and to look at the mystery and the wonder and the beauty of creation. Um, that wasn't heeded by most, I think it's fair to say. And I think outside of books, the church is one area that still at least urges us to look for mystery, to look for wonder and awe. So, along with that, it has become more and more apparent that there is a general malaise or despair out there in the world. And that the church, at least our church and the ELCA as a whole, and most other Protestant mainline denominations, have been unable to tap into. They have not been able to speak to those people in a way that I feel like the evangelical church, as we know it, and some of the non-denominational churches have been able to. Um, and I will admit, over the last 2 to 3 weeks, I have been probing counsel, sermons, Sunday school, general conversations, some of my early thoughts. And a lot of it has been met with blank stares, indifference, or I would say just in one ear, out the other. So in some ways, some of you are going to be my guinea pigs at the end. I've sent out 15 emails with this attached. And what this is a letter to my generation and the generations who are younger. In the church, we have pined, why don't our kids and our grandchildren go to church? So my first step in this leap of faith might be to use the members of this congregation who have children and grandchildren who don't go to church to perhaps be the vessels for what I have to say. And as I said, a large part of that is kind of inspired by Tolkien, the world in which he existed and the world in which we now find ourselves. So in some ways, I want to take us back to the beginning. We've talked about all of these themes and these ideas of Tolkien's that were so important. The idea of what evil is. It's this parasitic entity that only can exist by feeding off goodness. Sauron, Morgoth, all the evil out there is ultimately only what?
An absence of the good.
An absence or a corruption of, a twisting
Yeah.
of the good. Almost everything in Tolkien's universe that is evil began as something that was good. I think that's true in the real world as much as it is in the mythological world that inspired him and the world in which he created. Evil is the warping of goodness. Death, being the end of life, is a warping of life itself into something that's not life. So this idea of evil, this idea of good, this idea of the necessity, which we talked about over the last 2 weeks, friendship and fellowship, a community coming together in which people are equals. They all come in there with their each individual gifts, but they are there acting together as a party, as opposed to the rigid overlord on top and the minions who are disposable at the bottom. The collective versus the individual who just moves pieces around on the board. Um, Beauty and how that can be worked, how that can be changed. Appreciating the stillness and the slowness of life as opposed to the doing and the making and the machinations. But I return to that place for Tolkien that even though his world is entirely fictional and made up, it is in a sense still very true. What do I mean by that? I'm asking you. How is a world that is entirely fictional, entirely fantastical, still true?
Because we today have the collective versus the individual.
Okay.
I mean, we're still seeing that. You know, you either fit in or you don't. The appreciation of, just being still and waiting. We're also very impatient, and wanting it now. And most of us don't like the silence, or we're surrounded so much by chaos that we want to then turn in to the silence. And when that happens, then people look at you like you're strange because you're now more introverted than they thought you were, because you just want the calmness, because your life is so hectic all the time. So everything that he wrote in his book is very relevant to what is happening to us today. We just don't want to admit that even though he wrote fictitiously, it is true reality today.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. What else?
Good and evil
Okay.
seems to be a major theme in this book, and there's good and evil in our world.
I think there's also the whole issue of what's true and what's not true,
Yeah. What is truth?
right?
Pilot's question.
Because they teach about the truth. I mean, he through the characters and the various scenarios. I mean, this is one of the things they struggled with. Who do you count on? Who's your friend? Who's a friend and the wolf in sheep's clothing sort of thing. And even today, I mean, just an example. It's like, who do you believe in terms of political ads? Right? What's true? What's made up? What is almost conspiratorial dialogue that's intended to shift and to create a vacuum that be filled by something else.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's still true.
And in reality, it feels like everything's a ring and everyone's sour. But yeah, very true. What else?
I'm gonna say that it's a true reflection of the persona. Because
Okay.
you have good, you have evil, you have neutral, and then you have interaction between all of them for a common cause.
Yeah, I like that. I like the lifting up of the neutral, but people who either don't want to engage, see themselves above, or the elves are almost above in a certain sense. What takes place in Middle Earth? They'd rather not get involved at this point. This is no longer our worry. This is no longer our conflict. We prefer to stay out of it. Yet, moved by the work of the Fellowship and the urging of Gandalf, the elves are kind of prodded and poked into acting, even though it might not be the full engagement that the peoples of Middle Earth would like. The elves, that neutral force, do step in and stand among what we would say is the good in the world of Middle
And
Earth.
I might add, we're seeing that being played out in real time right now
Yeah.
with what's going on with the relationships between the United States, EU,
Yeah.
and the ongoing conflict with Iran.
What else? I'd say it speaks truths that don't always feel very evident to us as being true. What might be an example of that? I would say the idea that we talked about the eucatastrophe, so that idea of the sudden inbreaking of the good. And one of the great eucatastrophes of his work, so that's the inbreaking of the good, almost that kind of miracle, is when Gollum shows up and takes the ring back from Frodo and then falls into Mount Doom. But what is the genesis of that? Is it not Bilbo offering Gollum pity? Is it not Gandalf advising Frodo to do the same? To take Gollum off the board, not to show him mercy, not to show him pity, to kill him. Sauron gets the ring. Gollum's not there to do what it is that he did and to ultimately destroy the ring and himself. So I I would say the world tries to tell us you can't be soft, you can't be merciful, you can't have pity for people, you can't be empathetic. You have to be strong, you have to be stalwart. What Tolkien shows here is you never know what can come out of good. That mercy can produce good fruits. Sure, yes, you can offer mercy to someone and it can be rejected in a way that could be detrimental to you. But I think that idea that mercy matters is something that isn't quite understood or believed in Tolkien's Middle Earth, but also something we struggle with here in the world in which we live and in which we exist. Any other things of truths that are spoken in his works that maybe aren't as evident to us? I would say the great theme of his books is that great things can happen through small, inconsequential people, that being foolish on behalf of good can produce good things. I mean, the entire theme of the book ultimately is a little hobbit who takes the greatest weapon of the enemy, carries it through this perilous journey, for most of the time, only with one partner who is also just a little hobbit. And they are the reason as to why good triumphs over evil. I think we, I think throughout human history, there's this general belief that what does it matter what I do? I'm just one person. I couldn't possibly make a difference. But I think there is a truth that is spoken in The Lord of the Rings that what one little inconsequential person does can produce a great amount of good. And I think that is true. And I think that's something each and every one of us tends to assume isn't. I don't matter. I couldn't possibly do anything that would create any significant change. Right? I feel like that is we look out on the world and we're like, who am I? You know, what could I possibly do to help or to change? Um, and I think that lends itself not just to optimism, but to hope. Um, and I think that's one of the great, it's something integral to us as a church and as a people, not to abandon hope. And there's always they're almost eucatas. I cannot pronounce the word with the IC on the end, but these moments of eucatastrophe in which someone is about ready to give up hope, and the fellowship or their partners or whoever's around them binds them up and helps them sustain and endure and not fall into despair. Because to fall into despair is to give up, is to resign to the fact that evil is going to win. We don't have enough power, we don't have the strength. but instead that hope, even that little tiny glint, endures and carries on. Um, any other truths anyone can think of?
You say that, I'm sitting here thinking that whenever I read a book, it doesn't always work out this way, but whenever I read a book, um, fiction, somewhere along the line, the protagonist is gonna win.
Okay, yeah.
Something's gonna happen good. I mean, as bad as it might be, they're chained up, they're hung over a pit of fire or whatever, but somehow, some way, it's gonna work out. And the same is true, I think, with what Tolkien was writing. You wonder though, in today's environment, it doesn't always work out that way. The power of certain forces creates a momentum that may not be able to be overcome. And I think that's a reality. And not to say that I don't believe that goodness could prevail. But I think we have to also have a realistic perspective that, this isn't Jack Reacher coming to, somehow is gonna figure out a way to.
Yeah.
Make things good. I mean, if that makes sense.
No, it does. I mean, one of the things about fairy stories and myth is that typically the good guy or the protagonist or whoever will inevitably triumph. But I think the major takeaway we can take from Tolkien when speaking to that is the idea that it always felt like the characters always felt like evil was going to win. I think one of the greatest parts of the book is when Theoden and the Riders of Rohan ride up over the hill in Return of the King and look down on the army that is storming the walls of Minas Tirith and is like, oh man, like I knew it was going to be bad, but I did not think it was going to be this
May not
bad.
end well.
Yeah. But what do? Theoden's like, we ride.
Yeah.
Today is a dark day, a red day, but they ride nonetheless. And I think that is the greatest tool of evil's disposal, is to make you think it cannot be overtaken. And there will be time, I think there is time and time again in which good does lose. But
Well,
we're looking for the long game.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly, I was
okay.
gonna say,
Yeah.
they may lose the battle, but the war is the strategic outcome.
But yeah, but I totally agree with you. I mean, there are definitely times in history, and one of the things I'm going to talk about towards the end of class today, I think there are times where there's almost nothing we can do to change the course. But how does hope endure, and how do we continue, regardless of how it ends or what a new beginning looks like, those types of things? Because I think the call for the church, as is kind of this, is just to keep hoping and acting and fighting and not despair. Because I think a good story is by giving, because there are books that just play into that trope, I would say, of, oh, it looks like he's gonna lose, but he wins.
He wins.
But to make the losses true, to make them impactful, for you to wonder, even if they win here, they've lost a lot. It's taken its pound of flesh from them.
So are you saying a good writer writes a series of cliffhangers that keep you coming back, or?
I wouldn't say necessarily. I would say my favorite kind of story is I want a character who I love to find some kind of peace or happiness.
Mhm.
But in order for that to happen, I think they have to lose in meaningful ways as well.
And if you die with honor and reflection and redemption.
Yeah, I would say not Boromir is a good example.
Mhm.
Like he failed, he lost, but he didn't give to despair that, oh, I've done what I shouldn't have done. I shouldn't have tried to, I'll just go off and have a pity party or hate myself. He still tries to do what is right and he loses, he dies. Um, but there's a goodness and there's a triumph, I would say, in his death. And that's meaningful. And in some ways, it feels like he won in that moment, even though he lost. Um, but then once again, ultimately, because what he did allowed them to get away and the story continues, the battle continues. Um, but yeah, I'd say, Jack, that's a really good point. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of losing that takes place in real life.
Oh, just look at Ukraine,
Yeah,
right? I mean, this has been going on for 4 years. It's kind of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And so the end of that story has not been written. But yet, there's forces of evil and forces of good that are playing themselves out in the real-time battlefield. To me, if you really wanted to look at sort of the distillation of that particular issue, it's like, who's gonna win this and what forces need to be brought to bear in order for good to prevail or possibly evil to prevail. I mean, there's that reality that I think we face every day.
yeah,
And I like the perspective, three-party perspective. So your perspective being which side are you on, fighting for a cause, and then the remote third-party perspective, viewing the situation from the outside, and then choosing.
yeah. I would say another thing that Tolkien does well that speaks to the truth I would say we lost is this idea that the world is much deeper than it looks.
Mhm.
Um, we live in a material world. Um, and I don't just mean the things we buy. I mean, everything is about material, what can be seen, what can be felt. Um, and I don't think we look into the deeper meaning of things. So in Tolkien, a ring is not only a piece of jewelry, it is not a nice fancy piece of gold. The ring is the power of the Dark One. A road is not only a road, it is the pathway that they take towards victory, where there is friendship and fellowship. Meal is not only food, a song is not only song, a small person is not insignificant. That there is a deeper truth and reality to almost everything that exists in his world that I think we often ignore or overlook or don't take time to notice in our lives in the real world. We just want to get where we're going. We just want to move on to the next thing. There's no contemplation, there's no sitting, there's just moving from one thing to the next. And I think in large part that is because we've associated wonder and mystery and awe as childish things, as opposed to, in some ways, I would say, a spiritual resistance against the world in which we live that wants everything flattened, everything has a price, everything's there to be consumed or sold. Um, any thoughts on that?
I do, but
Go for it.
Absolutely.
I think because right now, let's pick on the United States, because we live here. So this rhetoric going back and forth, billionaires are good, billionaires are bad, where's that coming from? Where you are in life, did you grow up saying, I want to be rich, I want to be a billionaire, or do you just want to live life happily and you care less about finance and possession and all that? So I know when I was a young kid, It's like not knowing anything. I said, as long as I can live my life and provide for what I need, I'd be happy. What that means is that, I think I did a good job, but I'm not greedy. I don't lust for anything other than, having a strong family, believing in a good government and the church and all. And I'm happy and content. And I think a lot of people in Tolkien's, the Hobbit was happy, the Shire was happy. They had their festivals, they had their people celebrating. It was a small village, and I think you said it, Pastor Brad, that they were probably all related, because it was a small, but they were all happy. And that kind of brings back the stories that I heard from my grandparents and relations about how happy they were. And then growing up, and I remember, because I'm the youngest, I remember bits and pieces of that happiness. And I wanted to preserve that and carry that forward. Since then, I've interacted with people of all walks of life. And I can relate and I can adjust, not to patronize or anything like that, but I see, if they're happy, they're happy. Or to each his own. So.
Yeah.
I don't call it good or bad, it's just to each his own. That's probably more than you wanted to hear.
Anybody else?
It just made me think about, telling stories and, stories that you heard as a young child. I still talk about those stories, my kids at school had to do an activity, and one of the activities was to do a retelling of a grandparent story. Well, how long does that have to be, Miss? I said, I don't know, how long was the story? And they go, well, I said, I don't know. Oh, your grandparents get your mom to tell you a story about, whatever. And then to see them come in and what they wrote was like this much. And I'm thinking, there's more to the story than just 4 or 5 lines on the paper to be done with it. I can sit and tell stories that I've heard all my life that, hours upon hours, and when siblings around, oh yeah, I remember, but these kids have missed that part of the wonder about what happened in your life or what happened in your parents' life. Now the boys wrote a little bit more than that because they talked to grandpa who was in World War II or something like that, and they shared the military side of that and how he saw someone get blown up and they thought that was great, but it was amazing how that was something I thought would be very easy for them. And we're talking, I teach 9th and 10th graders, so that would be something, but that part of their life they don't have, which is scary for me to think. Then who's going to carry on their family, telling in their family as families get older and parents and grandparents are becoming deceased, when these young kids can't tell those stories.
I think it's up to us. My mother had 3 sisters and we all lived somewhere else, but we very much, as our childhood, our summers were all together, the families gathered. I have 2 sisters, well, I had one sister, now one passed. But anyway, we all had kids the same age, and we made it a point to, Annabeth's childhood was with her cousins, whether it was up at Julian Evans or we were at the beach or whatever, and they've heard us talk and repeat stories and stuff. But when you say that,
Yeah, and I think
It's,
our kids are, but I'm thinking of this younger generations that's coming in, that their life is so busy. There's not the sit around the dinner table at night,
Yeah.
and to,
that's
sit and have
Yeah.
dinner
Yeah,
and talk about your day and talk about what
Yeah.
happened or whatever. That is, I mean, that is not heard on, heard of. It's like parents running here to get this child, running there to take that child. So that family, they may spend summers together, but they're not having that day in and day out of interaction, talking about what family life was for their kids to understand.
I think kind of what we're talking about here is legacy
Mhm.
and understanding what, especially family legacy and what this means. Whether this is good or bad, I'll leave it to you to judge. But this past Christmas, so my grandkids, they all live out of state. And three of them live in Boise, Idaho. So we travel every year to Boise. To go have Christmas with them. This past Christmas, they gave my wife and I a gift. It was a box, and the box of cards. And in the cards, on each of the cards, there is a question. Grandma and Grandpa explain, take care. And the whole idea is what I read of the box was that this is the way to bridge the generations.
I like that.
That it's not possible in casual conversation to understand the meaning of what we did as younger. I won't go back how far. And it's in a dialogue. It's not written down. It's a dialogue. They can ask questions and so forth. I have a family reunion coming up, which we've been doing the last several years. And as you were saying, Danny, as you were saying what you did, my thought was that needs to be done. We have 50 members of the family. Last year it was far more than that, people decided to come and go. But to have a night when we ask the older members of the family, which we still only have one of the generation before me is still living, and to understand that. I think, I don't know if this plays back, Brad, into Tolkien, but I wonder if within the boundaries of the story, he's understanding what is the legacy of this civilization and all elements of the civilization, and telling that so that it can be told again and again until eventually Bilbo gets on the ship and leaves. And that kind of breaks the mold. So
I would say Tolkien's Lord of the Rings is a continuation of the legacy of the practice of myth.
I'm sorry, say that again.
It's a continuation of the practice of myth.
Myth.
Yeah. So the stories of older generations being conveyed to the newer generations, but it shares or it continues on from what came before. So in some ways, it's a generational story that is built on the generations that have passed, but which we still have those works. But I'm tempted to just dive in to my thing because this idea of generations is an integral piece. But I want to touch on story.
I'll get on the dining board and go.
I want to touch on story.
Come on, you're on a 10-meter board. You're not going head first. Just go feet first and let it go.
But I think story is important.
Yes.
And not just the stories of experience of life, but how myths and fantasy and fairy tales and stories tell truths to the mind and the soul that when we engage in facts ends up becoming arguments about realities.
Can I say something here?
Yeah.
Because what you just said is extremely important. And I don't know if you use this in your classroom, but when I taught, the way I always thought of teaching was to tell a story. Because telling stories causes the listener, if you do it well, to put yourself into that space to gain a better level of understanding than just spewing out data.
Yeah.
I think stories are incredibly powerful. And if you're, and to some degree, I'm a public speaker, and that's one of the things that I try to do, to your point, is you tell the stories so that people learn from that.
I second that, because I'm a team in high tech.
Yeah.
I worked in tell a story, relate to the customer, and then interject the facts.
There's a great example of this, Xerox. And back in the day, right, when you had the repairmen out and so forth, they encouraged repairmen to come in every morning and have a cup of coffee. And the reason for having the cup of coffee was so that they could either share what they learned yesterday or get to common groupthink around solving the problem. And it was all around stories. And it was something that they basically created and fostered the environment to do that. So the books that you've read, by the way, it's been 50 years since I read those books. But they do create that story, that ability, that environment for you to learn from, whatever that is that you're learning.
Yeah.
You know, you ever hear of Matt Baker?
The name's familiar, but
He does these, he does a channel on YouTube called Useful Charts. Kind of like genealogy charts, but he expands it across time, any topic, and he spells it out. And I just ordered one recently. He does the history of time for mankind, and then,
It's a long chart.
yeah, and he overlays the Bible stories, which is really interesting because the oldest written artifact that archaeology has discovered dates back to like 930, 931 BCE. Okay, and before that was all the word of mouth stories.
Yeah.
The Old Testament stories. And that kind of ring a bell, because as far as I know, in my 62 years of age, I've had nobody question the Old Testament. But I always seen the New Testament being questioned quite a bit from time to time. So, but that's the New Testament, it was the written piece. The Old Testament was the
oral tradition.
Yeah.
That was fine right now. So just the last piece before I dive in. I think it's important to know Jesus doesn't tell myths, but he tells stories in the form of parables. And the Old Testament does this as well. And I think one of the most iconic is David and Bathsheba, the prophet Nathan comes and he tells him a story. There's a man, wealthy man, who wants to have a feast for his friends. And there's a poor man who all he has is this little sheep. The rich man takes the sheep and he slaughters it and, has this feast with his friend. And Nathan asks, what should happen to this rich man? And David is furious that this would happen within his kingdom. And after he goes on his little tirade, Nathan says, what? That's what you did.
You did.
That is what you did. And that dawning realization that through that medium of story, the truth of the reality, that I was mad that this had happened in my kingdom when this is what I had actually done in my own kingdom. I had done. I think it conveys something that just merely accusation. It trains the soul to think, to look, to search in a way that mere facts or just hearing recounts of what happened doesn't. It conveys something deeper. So for you two people, this is the end.